mess. First, though, our top story this half an hour, the Republican health care plan. Another effort to bring the bill to the floor before President Trump's first 100 days did not happen last night. House Speaker Paul Ryan blamed Democrats for the showdown. Watch.
I would be shocked that they would want to see a government shutdown, that the Democrats would want to do that. Look, let's just take a step back. The reason this government funding bill is not ready is because Democrats have been dragging their feet. Periodically, they haven't even been being shown up for negotiations.
Joining us right now is the House Judiciary Committee and Freedom Caucus member, Congressman Ron DeSantis. Congressman, good to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
So you say you will vote for this health care bill as it is, correct?
That's right.
What's holding your colleagues back?
Well, I think what's happened during this whole process, Maria, is that you see that there is a divide in the conference about whether we actually want to repeal Obamacare. I think you got certain people, conservatives, that say you got to get at this regulatory structure that's driving up the premiums. Otherwise, we're not really doing what we said we do. Other members don't really want to go there. And so we're in a situation where there's a divide. So I think what the bill does is by allowing states to effectively opt out of this regulatory regime. If you have a reform-minded governor who would want to do that, like I do, I think you have a path for lower premiums. I think some of the other members may have had issues with Medicaid or things from even the first bill. So this change may not have necessarily swayed them. So I think we'll see, how it shakes out. But this is definitely a compromise. We promised to repeal it root and branch. I think that would be the easiest thing to do. But we're kind of where we are, and I think this is probably the best we can do right now.
Congressman, it really doesn't seem like the changes that we're talking about here are going to bring on some of your moderate colleagues. I mean, does this really have a chance to pass, given that you're not addressing some of those Medicaid concerns, some of those subsidy concerns that they raised with the first bill?
Well, I think we'll see. The press would say that all those moderates, many of them would have ended up voting for it the first time. I don't know that that's true, but that's kind of out there. I guess we'll see. I'm not even opposed to making some accommodations there, but it is what it is. I mean, I think each member's got to look and say, what did they campaign on? Did they campaign on repealing it? If so, then I think this is probably the game in town right now. If they didn't, then I respect that.
I think one of the problems is that perhaps Republicans are not highlighting the benefits that actually go to a lot of the moderates' concerns. So they're talking about things like invisible risk sharing. Nobody knows what that is. Nobody wants to be invisible, and nobody wants to share risk. If instead they called it the Guaranteed Pre-Existing Conditions Protection Fund, then people would go, oh, yeah, then I don't need to worry about this. Tell us a little bit about the efforts within the GOP caucus to make sure that people understand that that people actually are protected and they're not actually going to be hurt by the changes that are being proposed here.
Well, you're absolutely right. There's two massive funds just for pre-existing conditions. And understand, that's less than 10% of the population on the individual market. Obviously, it's a much smaller percentage of that we're talking about here. So there really is a lot of money for that. And what that does, it not only protects people with pre-existing conditions on the individual market, but for me, just as important, it takes the burden off all the other individual policyholders who've had their premiums jacked up, their deductibles jacked up, because all the costs have been imposed on them. Now you're spreading that out with a public fund. So I think you're opening up a pathway to have lower premiums for people. You are dealing with people with pre-existing conditions, but dealing with it in a way that is going to be funded out of a public fund rather than out of jacked up premiums for a relatively small number of Americans.
Congressman, it's Mike Murphy. You mentioned that this bill, as it is a compromise. Just you being down there on the floor, can this bill, as is, pass?
We don't know yet. I think that's what we're working on. I think that the Speaker and the leadership are working on it. I think they said that they're trying to educate some members on some of these changes. And for me, if you have a path to lower premiums and you have a path to give people more choice in their plans, that is the main reason people are so frustrated with Obamacare. And I think those are benefits that will sell in these districts. And remember, even some of our moderates in swing districts, some of those districts used to be held by Democrats who got voted out because of Obamacare. So I think if they can say that they've delivered some positive changes, that would be a good thing for them.
What about a short-term spending bill, given where we are with the debt ceiling? Are you expecting a short-term spending bill to extend the government funding through May 5th?
Yeah, I mean, Maria, we've known about this deadline for 5 months. It's just Congress, we never do anything on time or early. So we're going to do that today. You know, my view is the House needs to be able to move funding bills, and then the Senate should try to process it. And if Chuck Schumer is going to stand up there and filibuster funding for the troops and bring us to a lapse of appropriation, then shine the light on him. I think that's an irresponsible thing to do. But I think we kind of concede that because he has the power to filibuster, therefore there's nothing we can do unless we give Democrats everything what they want. So we got to get out of this funding box we've been in. We've been in this for years. We now have a Republican president who can help with this. So I hope we do a better job when the fiscal year ends in September.
The two biggest controversial issues there were funding for the border wall and the cost-sharing payments for Obamacare. The president has backed off of both of those positions at this point. It seems to me that this is exactly what Democrats were hoping for. Where's the resistance coming from here? Where are they taking a stand at this point?
Well, I'm not sure. I think that they view, if they can throw a monkey wrench into this thing, that because Republicans are in control, I think they think the press will spin it as, oh, Republicans don't know what they're doing. And I think that's kind of a narrative they want. And look, maybe they'll end up getting it. But you're right. If you look at the funding bill, first of all, we don't even know what's in it for sure because it's all being done in secret. But show me how this is appreciably different than these omnibus bills that passed under Obama. And I'm just not sure I see the difference. And I think that's going to frustrate conservative voters because you have the whole reins of the government now. What are you doing to build the wall? What are you doing to support the military? What are you doing to root out waste in government? And as you suggested, I'm not sure that there's anything on those scores that's going to be in this bill once it's finished.
As you've said throughout these comments, we're doing this rigmarole over and over and over again. And the whole reason that we're doing it is people aren't aware. There aren't just one filibuster in the Senate. There's actually two. And it's the first one, not the one that stops debate and lets you have a vote, or the second one that lets you stop debate and have the vote, but the first one that even allows legislation to get to the floor that's been misused in the last 20 years and never used to be used to stop deliberation on things that has become a problem. Is there a growing recognition that the Senate needs to get back to being a functional deliberative body and allow 50 votes to allow something to be deliberated about and have discussion about? Getting rid of that first filibuster.
So when we do budgets, you do budget with 50 votes in the Senate. And we actually did a budget last Congress, both houses, for the first time in years. But then when you go to fund the government, because the budget doesn't fund it, it's just a framework, you do appropriations bills. And you're right. Harry Reid was filibustering, even allowing funding for our military to come to the floor. And so there was no way that they could even debate it, much less pass it. To me, I think that's irresponsible. I would support 50 votes if you're funding the government pursuant to a budget that's already passed. To me, when you do the 60 for appropriations, you're watering down the power of the purse. It makes it more difficult for Congress to wield it. So I think that's right. But I also think that if they're going to take a position where they're going to filibuster even discussing funding for our troops, you got to shine a light on it. You got to take that case to the American people, and we've not been willing to do that so far.
Congressman, let me switch gears, ask you about what has become really one of the biggest problems now the country faces, and that is North Korea. President Trump told Reuters that North Korea is his biggest global challenge. Listen to this. I want to get your reaction.
There's a chance that we could end up having a major conflict with North Korea. Absolutely.
Can you tell us more about that, sir?
Well, I mean, we have a country that's effectively a prison. It's being run by a plump, immature, and I think irrational kid. And so I think the chance of a miscalculation is very high. People say that Kim is rational because he wants to hold power, and I agree with that. That's his main thing. He wants to hold power. But I think how he makes those calculations, I think, are different than other leaders in the past may have in other areas of the world. And so I think the prospects of there being really a significant conflict, because you have Seoul 30 miles south of the DMZ there. He could not win a conflict with the United States or the West or our allies in Asia, but he could do a lot of damage on the way out. So I think the stakes are very, very high. I think the president is right to work with China to try to diffuse this as best we can. But I think it's clear you cannot allow a guy of that mental state to have ICBMs that can deliver nuclear warheads halfway around the world.
So is the U.S. supposed to be preemptive then in some way?
Well, look, I think that obviously would be a major decision, and it comes with the reality that even if you were successful in doing that, there could be a lot of damage done to the people of South Korea and to other allies in the region. And, of course, we have American troops there.
Right.
So the stakes are very high. I think it's a different calculation than, say, when the Israelis took out Assad's reactor in 2006 or when they took out Saddam's reactor in the early 80s. I think that this comes with it the chance of having some major damage done.
All right, Congressman, we'll be watching the developments. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Congressman Ron DeSantis.